Now, there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Okay, that's a bombshell sentence if you've been tracking with us. And let me see if I can explain why. Naomi comes back to Bethlehem, a widow, along with both of her sons dead. That's not all. Not only was she a widow and without sons, but her father was apparently dead, and there's no record of her even having brothers. And so in one sentence, everything potentially changes for Naomi and, as an extension, Ruth. There's a wealthy male relative living in Bethlehem who could, if he wanted to, change their lives. His name is Boaz. Well, let's find out what happened next. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." Here Naomi is sitting at home, not doing anything, we're told, to address their situation of poverty. We know from previous parts of the story that she's wallowing in self-pity, giving into despair and depression, and now letting that lead to lethargy. She should have been the one leading the way into the fields, but she wasn't. Ruth, on the other hand, is determined to try and do something about their life, to find a way, make a way, just anything. She seems to know that Naomi won't join her in even trying, so she doesn't say, "Well, why don't we go do this?" She instead just, assumes the full mantle of responsibility. She says, "Let me go do this." Well, let's keep reading. So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. Okay, this is getting good. You can smell a lot of stuff coming here. The field she goes to is the field of her family redeemer. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Okay, I know I keep stopping reading just one verse, and you want me to shut up so that you can find out what happens next, but this is, again, significant. This is our first introduction to Boaz and what kind of man he is. And he greets the workers with, "The Lord be with you." And they know enough about him to reply with an equally spiritual answer, "The Lord bless you." But Boaz was apparently such a deeply devout man that he greeted his employees in light of his faith, and they respected him enough about how sincere he was and how real his faith was to him to do the same, which, again, says volumes about his character, this man's integrity, his reputation, his merit. Well, now we can keep going. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes rest in the shelter." Okay, first we learned something about Boaz. Here we learned some things about Ruth. First, that she was probably pretty. You don't have to see that in what we read, but there's only two reasons Boaz would have asked about her specifically. One is that she was the only person gleaning in the field, which was been unlikely. This is the heart of the harvest season. The other is that somehow she stood out by the way of her physical appearance, or at least in terms of being on the younger side of things. The second thing we learned about Ruth is that she was humble in her condition. Although she had the right to glean in the fields, she still asked permission, being willing to let her state, her need be known, and to throw herself on the kindness of others. Third, we find out she's a hardworking young woman. Even the other workers commented on how hard she had been working. So her work ethic was strong. Now, she didn't know that Boaz was a family redeemer to her and Naomi, but Boaz knew. When he was told that this was the widow of the son of Elimelech, he knew. He knew his relation to her. And this is what he did next. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Well, that was actually quite a bit. He immediately went to her, called her his daughter. That tells you two things. One, that she immediately He immediately had a soft spot in his heart for this woman, and 2, that he was indeed old enough to be her dad. Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied, "but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." "I hope I continue to please you, sir," she replied. "You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I am not even one of your workers." Now, here's what's interesting to me about that. Ruth is obviously grateful and responds accordingly, but it's Boaz who surprises me. She asks why he's doing this. And did you notice what he didn't say that he could have? He didn't say, "Well, you don't know this, but I'm your family redeemer." He didn't say, "Well, I'm doing this because I'm rich and I can afford to be generous." He didn't say he was doing it because, I'm a great guy. He didn't say it was because she was pretty and then use it to flirt with her or take advantage of her. He didn't lay claim to anything that might be seen as boasting or puffing himself up or making him look, larger in her eyes. He said, "I did this because of you." But Boaz isn't done. Let's keep reading. At mealtime, this had been more like the lunchtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. And as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. And don't rebuke her." So here again, we see him doing all he can to care for her. He honors her with his table. He presents her with food, and then he makes sure that her labor in the fields is honored and very productive, even saying to his workers to not worry if she goes right into the harvest. And if she does keep gleaning, purposefully leave plenty on the ground for her to pick up. Well, let's finish this part of the story out. So Ruth gathered barley there all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. And the Hebrew word there for basket was actually ephah, which would have been about 20 quarts or about 2 weeks worth of food. So when Boaz told his workers to leave some on for her to get, they did some serious leaving behind for her. So she carried it back into town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. "Where did you gather all this grain today?" Naomi asked. "Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. She said, "The man I worked with today is named Boaz." "May the Lord bless him," Naomi told her daughter-in-law. "He is showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." Then Ruth said, "Well, what's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed." "Good," Naomi acclaimed. "Do as he said, my daughter. Stay with the young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, but you'll be safe with him." So Ruth worked alongside the women in Boaz's fields and gathered grain with them until the end of the barley harvest. Then she continued working with them through the wheat harvest in early summer. And all the while, she lived with her mother-in-law. Well, 3 things to note as we close out this part of the story. First, gotta love Naomi. I mean, she didn't care one bit about Ruth going out to glean in the fields at the start of that day. But when she comes home, having connected with Boaz, and she sees maybe some dollar signs in that relationship, suddenly Ruth's safety is very important to her. Yes, do as Boaz says, because that way you'll be safe. And then second, we learn that Ruth continued going to the fields of Boaz and continued to be cared for as a result, working all the way through the barley harvest and then all the way through the wheat harvest. So that would have been between 2 and 3 months of gleaning in this way under the care and protection of Boaz. And we'll see that Naomi will not stand for that. She is going to do something radical